The Rot, that is the shocking title Malek Bennabi chose for his memoirs. Professor, to begin, what drives a thinker of such stature to choose a title with such intensity and pessimism? Is it merely a literary metaphor or a description of a reality he lived through?
Thank you for this important opening question. Indeed, the title The Rot is not merely a metaphor. It is the very essence of Malek Bennabi's critical vision for Islamic civilization in its state of disintegration. The author clarifies in his prologue and introduction that he chose this title because it encapsulates all the events and figures he would present. He believed that the reality he experienced, particularly in Algerian society under colonialism, had reached such a degree of decomposition and moral decay that it could only be described as rot. He speaks not of a physical rot, but a profound intellectual, moral, and social rot, manifesting in the practices of colonialism itself and in the phenomenon of susceptibility to colonization, al-qabiliyya lil-istimar, which he viewed as even more perilous. This title reflects the author's personal bitterness and suffering, yet it transcends them to become a diagnosis of an entire society's condition.
Don't you see this as excessive harshness or perhaps an arrogant tone from a thinker who perceives himself as having come before or after his time?
That's a valid question which touches upon a sensitive point in Bennabi's critique. When he describes the natives as colonial products, he isn't intending to demean them as human beings. Rather, it's an analytical observation of what colonialism did to them and how it shaped them. He argues that colonialism wasn't content with mere military and economic occupation. It actively sought to forge a native individual, stripped of agency, ineffective, weak in character and morals, incapable of free thought or action. Thus, the contempt and disdain he refers to is directed at this state of decomposition and weakness that resulted from colonialism and the society's susceptibility to it, not at their inherent origin or identity. It is the cry of a thinker who grasped the full extent of the catastrophe that had befallen society, and he sought to powerfully shake a dormant consciousness, even if his words seemed shocking or harsh.
However, these memoirs were written many years after the events they recount, starting in 1951 to cover occurrences from 1932 to 1940. How does this temporal gap between the events themselves and their documentation impact the memoir's credibility, especially since Bennabi himself states, "I now realize," and "I now know better how to analyze people and their positions"?
That's an extremely precise observation and a fundamental methodological point when studying memoirs in general.
In this context, the name Massignon emerges as a pivotal figure, whom Bennabi describes as the spider pulling the strings, and how Massignon was an executor of Father de Foucault's will, which aimed to change the Algerian people. Can this portrayal be considered an accurate depiction of Massignon's character and role, or is Bennabi perhaps exaggerating his representation as a primary antagonist and orchestrator of all conspiracies?
The portrayal of Massignon as the spider is a vivid illustration of Bennabi's analytical perspective. Massignon was not merely an Orientalist. He was a figure of profound influence within French circles, with significant sway over colonial policy towards Muslims in North Africa. Bennabi, as a thinker who interlinks thought, reality, and the psychological analysis of both colonizer and colonized, perceived Massignon as the embodiment of an intellectual colonial project, aiming not just at territorial occupation, but at the subjugation of the mind and soul. His description as the spider reflects the intricate web of relationships he wove, which sought to penetrate and direct young elites to serve the colonial agenda, whether those elites were conscious of it or not. Bennabi was a direct challenge to that agenda, which aimed to obliterate Arab and Islamic identity in Algeria. This isn't an exaggeration so much as it is an unveiling of a deeper vision of the civilizational conflict unfolding at that time. Can it be argued that this harsh internal critique was necessary for a genuine revival, or does it primarily reflect a form of personal disappointment Bennabi harbored towards those around him? Bennabi's critique of scholars and politicians is one of the most salient features of his reformist thought. He wasn't criticizing individuals for their own sake, but rather the underlying phenomenon and mindset.
And finally, Professor, how can we read the Rot memoirs today within the context of our contemporary Arab and Islamic reality? Does it still offer lessons that can be drawn, or is it merely a historical document reflecting the conditions of a bygone era?
Absolutely. The Rot Memoirs are far from being merely a historical document of a bygone era. They are a pivotal work for understanding many of our current challenges. Malek Bennabi's diagnosis of susceptibility to colonization as an internal malady compels us to ponder the concept of colonization in its broader sense, not just as foreign occupation, but as a psychological and intellectual state that inhibits a nation from achieving resurgence even after physical occupation has ended.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this profound and insightful analysis. We have greatly enjoyed this discussion.
My thanks extend to you and to our esteemed listeners.
And with that, we conclude today's episode of our podcast. Until next time.